They called it the quiet room of history, a small private space aboard a ship that had been meant for ordinary rituals of daily life, now transformed into an extraordinary archive beneath the ocean. The discovery of the Titanic's bathroom, buried in the dark reaches of the North Atlantic, was not a single dramatic moment, but a slow accumulation of careful planning, precise engineering, and the patient, stubborn curiosity of explorers and scientists. What emerged from the gloom was a scene that combined domestic intimacy with the scale of industrial collapse. A place where porcelain and pipe met the indifferent forces of the sea. The approach began where all deep-sea archaeology begins, with distance and patience. A remotely operated vehicle threaded a cautious path through fields of silt and scattered wreckage, its lamps cutting narrow cones of light through choking black water. Instruments mapped the contours of the hull and hollow interiors, building a three-dimensional picture of a ship whose familiar profile above water had become a fragmented city below. When the cameras found a cavity that resembled a room with plumbing, the team slowed their descent. Images came in grain by grain. A tiled floor pattern here, a rounded basin there, a curve that suggested a bathtub. The initial exhilaration was tempered by protocol. Every move was documented, every measurement logged for later analysis. Entering the space was an exercise in humility. The room itself was smaller than many had imagined, its scale a reminder that the Titanic's opulence was often concentrated in intimate corners as much as in grand staircases and dining halls. A row of sinks stood at an angle, chrome long since eaten away by corrosion and mineral accretion. A bathtub lay on its side, where the floor had collapsed. Porcelain edges were softened by a century in cold, saline water, barnacles clustering in the thinner places. Toilets, once private, ordinary fixtures, now read as relics, their bowls filled with sediment and encrusted deposits that traced the slow hand of time. Marine life had, in a sense, rewritten the room's function. Sponges and encrusting. Organisms formed layers like textiles across fittings. Small fish darted through gaps where hinges had rusted away. Brittle stars and amphipods lived in cavities. Tiny colonies of algae and biofilm traced faint, greenish streaks across tile. The evidence of human presence remained, however, a faint outline of a tile pattern, a fragment of a towel hook, a rusted screw half-turned in a bracket. These traces were not dramatic artifacts, but intimate marks of routine existence, fragments that invited speculation about the people who had once performed ordinary acts within these walls. Material science became part of the narrative. Specialists took microsamples of porcelain glaze and metal to analyze corrosion processes, salt crystallization, and the microbial communities that accelerate or inhibit decay. Conservators noted how certain glazes had survived as glossy islands amid pitted surfaces, and how iron components had become petrified by layers of mineral accretion. The chemistry of the deep sea, cold, dark, rich in dissolved metals, had its own signature in the artifacts. Under scanning electron microscopes, grains of salt and manganese oxide appeared as tiny topographies, and microbes that colonize metal surfaces revealed metabolic strategies for extracting energy from iron and sulfur. These microscopic actors had, over a century, rewritten the chemistry of otherwise inert objects. Photogrammetry was a key tool. By stitching thousands of high-resolution images, researchers produced millimeter-accurate models of the bathroom and its components. Those models are more than decorative 3D renderings. They are scientific records that allow measurements, virtual conservation, and public access without risking the precarious integrity of the wreck. Watching the rendered model rotate on a screen, the bathtub's lip, the curve of a basin, the modeled pattern of barnacle growth, is a peculiar experience of seeing the past restored as data. Students, conservators, and the public could examine features in ways that would be impossible in situ. from the comfort of a lab or gallery, while the physical site remained undisturbed. There is also an ethical dimension. Titanic is not simply a wreck. It is a maritime grave that holds the remains and memories of more than 1,000 people. Even a bathroom, seemingly trivial, carries with it the weight of those who lived aboard and the context of their final hours. The teams involved had to balance curiosity and caution to document and interpret without sensationalizing. There, protocols governed every interaction. Where lights could be shown, which surfaces might be brushed for study, which microsamples could be taken. Respect for the deceased and for descendant communities shaped decisions as much as scientific priorities. Still, the scene provoked questions that bridged personal history and large-scale engineering failure. How had ordinary parts of a ship's plumbing behaved during the descent? Which fixtures succumbed early to floodwaters, and which remained intact as the hull disintegrated? The physical evidence suggested a complex choreography, pressures that warped metal, water that traced paths. Through hidden channels, and 1,000 small structural failures that together became the catastrophe we know from historical accounts. Pipes bent in ways that suggested differential flooding. Tiles held in place in pockets where air had trapped longer. Hinges split along lines of stress. Each fragment contributed to a broader reconstruction of what civilians and crew members experienced as the sinking unfolded. The discovery also reframed public imagination. For many, the bathroom was not a grand artifact. It was a humanizing vignette, the site of a dented soap dish, the residue of a towel ring that bridged the gap between headline and human life. When images and models were released, audiences responded to the intimacy. Comments about the ordinary rituals that the ship's passengers once observed reflect. Museums and educational platforms used the visual documentation to create interpretive materials that emphasized human stories rather than mere spectacle, showing how everyday objects can become powerful conduits of memory. The scientific work did not end with images. Samples were taken for DNA analysis of microbial mats. These studies are revealing how microbial colonization patterns vary based on material type and microclimate within the wreck. Sediment cores extracted near the bathroom provided microfossil assemblages and particles that helped date shifts in the wreck's microenvironment. Engineers used the structural data to refine models of progressive collapse, improving our understanding of how large steel ships degrade under prolonged immersion. Policymakers and heritage managers examined the findings to inform guidelines for non-invasive research and for the long-term stewardship of submerged cultural sites. But perhaps the most affecting aspect of the discovery was its ability to evoke presence, a sense that lives once enacted in the ordinary rituals of washing, dressing, and modest privacy had left a trace. A corroded towel hook can conjure a hand reaching for a towel. A cracked basin can remind us of mornings once begun with the clatter of porcelain. In that submerged room, the everyday became a portal to empathy across a century. This, more than the data or the high-resolution models, is the enduring value of maritime archaeology. It connects us to lives lived with the same small routines that defined human existence. Looking forward, the bathroom's discovery has implications for how we treat submerged cultural heritage. It underscores the importance of meticulous documentation, of balancing public interest with respect, and of interdisciplinary collaboration. The models and data produced will inform conservation strategies not only for Titanic, but for other sites where the sea has claimed human artifacts. They remind us that beneath the waves, history is often found in modest, private places whose stories are as telling as any grand monument. The Aroyi withdrew, lights dimmed, and the room resumed its slow transformation. Yet the digital record and careful study will endure, guiding future stewardship of submerged heritage and reminding use that ordinary places keep the power to connect us with lives once lived.